Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about understanding the four cornerstones of training for a strength-based athlete, and kind of how they flow together in a way that will make sense to a lot of people. Because this is a lot of what I do personally, it's a lot of what I talk about, and this is what I do with my own clients. And that is this whole idea of taking these four cornerstones and working them together into a system. And it needs to be worked into a system to where they feed into each other. And those cornerstones are going to be speed, strength, or power, and we would train that with dynamic effort type work, right? Training for power, training for maximum strength, and maximum strength is defined by your ability to lift a heavy 1 rep max. Metabolic fatigue, which you would think of as generally hypertrophy training. People like to call it bodybuilder training, but I really hate that term, because everyone needs to gain muscle mass. So hypertrophy type training through training volume. You're creating fatigue in the muscles, not just tension, because tension comes from the really heavy work. And then metabolic conditioning, which is going to affect your work capacity, your ability to recover, things like that, and just being in shape with cardio. So how do these things feed into each other? Well, when you go and think about it, the power aspect really is a critical component. And the thing is that power training itself lends itself to the other elements to some extent. And here's what I mean. Usually to get explosive, you need to do relatively large numbers of low reps with moderate or lightweight, right? That's how we generally do speed work. Well, for me, for pressing, for example, whatever pressing you're doing, it's something like 10 triples. For speed squats, it's like 12 doubles. For speed pulls, 10 to 20 singles. Those are normal. Those are usually what I prescribe. That's usually what I run most of the time. We deviate from that using relatively light weights. Depending upon how you set everything up with bands, chains, or raw weight, or whatever you're doing, something in the range of 50 to 70% of a max, done for maximum acceleration. And if the correct exercises are picked and the correct modalities, this develops power and explosiveness. But how does it feed into the other stuff? Well, it does have a work capacity component, so it creates some fatigue back towards the metabolic fatigue, but it also helps you get good at practicing main lifts. In other words, if you're using it on a bench press, it will actually teach you how to bench press because it teaches you how to set up an arch over and over and over. Right? You have to set up on a bench press over and over. You have to set up on a deadlift over and over to do all of these. So they carry over in terms of skill work. They give you the skill to set up for heavy lifts. So there's some carryover, but the main thing is that explosive training in general does tend to yield some hypertrophy. Not always as much as you're going to get off of your metabolic fatigue, but it's there. And if you get explosive, the more explosive you can be, the better you're going to be at 1 rep maxes. There's going to be carryover. Even exercises that aren't particularly explosive, the ability to recruit upper threshold muscle fibers more quickly because you are more explosive is going to lend itself to better maxes. Okay, so it's really one of the most important ones, and we can't discount compensatory acceleration and explosive training. I personally consider it to be the most important out of those four. Right, I consider it to be the most important. Not that we can remove any of the four. You really need all four of these cornerstones. But I think the introduction of it into people's training is kind of a game changer. It's kind of a game changer. I mean, we could train any of the other modalities. You could combine the max work with the metabolic work, and actually someone can get pretty big and strong. We could take nothing but Metcon work and get somebody in really good shape. But I think it's really the speed work like that and the explosive training that really kind of takes all this training up to another level. All right, particularly for someone who has been stalled. But I consider it to be the most important. But then we come back around. Metabolic fatigue, hypertrophy work. Because if you're going to be strong and you're going to be powerful, you're going to be limited by the amount of muscle mass that you have. You are going to be limited by the amount of muscle mass that you have. And while a person can gain a pretty good amount of muscle mass off of those first two, off of maximum strength and speed training, Because even hitting maxes has some training effect. You'll gain a little muscle off of max. It's not going to be much. But it's there. And people who say, oh, you don't gain any, well, those people are just idiots. That's simply not true. It's just that it's very, very, very little. Well, speed work can make you bigger, absolutely. But again, by that same token, you're going to have limited amounts of it. You can't do it on everything. So metabolic fatigue becomes important at a certain threshold if you were just trying to get bigger and thicker. Well, muscle size matters for strength, and it matters in everything that you do in any sort of strength-based sport. Guy who's got an extra 15 pounds of muscle is going to hit you harder out on a football field. He's going to kick you harder in an MMA match or a kickboxing match. Okay? And anyone who's in denial of these things is in denial of sports science and physics. We know these are facts. You have to be able to step aside and take all this esoteric nonsense out and look at the science behind it. We know this isn't even subject to debate in the sports science world. We know that a trained fighter with 15 pounds more muscle and more strength can kick harder than before he gained it. Right? Football player with 15 pounds more muscle is going to knock you down easier. A rugby player, the same thing. These are strength-based sports. Doesn't mean they don't have other skills, and that's the difference. So any strength-based athlete, you've got to have size. You have to have size. It's critical. And so metabolic fatigue becomes important. And then obviously maximum strength, because it carries over into all of that. You need maximum strength to develop the maximum potential of all of these others. Now, a lot of people say, well, why does that matter? Well, because when you really need to push or pull something, your 1 rep max strength is going to matter. Hitting someone on a football field, let's come back to the point. We can have explosiveness, we can have power, we can have size, but it is the max training. Training to max is it gives you the potential to exert that maximum force a single time. And how does that displayed in a sport? Well, that's displayed by when you hit somebody and connect, and I don't care whether we're talking about tackling them on a football field or a kick or a punch, if you needed to land devastating amounts of power in a single 1 second movement one time, that is maximum strength displayed. Or obviously if you need to do it in a competition, you need to lift a maximum weight. But maximum strength obviously is important to any strength-based sport. And it has to be trained. It has to be trained. And that's the beauty of it also, of when we look at maximum strength, we can also see where our weaknesses lay. Right? When you put somebody under a maximum weight, you can find their weak points. Because they tend to come out real quick when you are forced to go 100% all out a single time. And let's back to the other point I make, 1 rep maxes are the safest way to train heavy. It's a contradictory statement, but it shouldn't be if you understand training and you really look at it. Not from a theoretical, but from a practical, real-world perspective. Training to a 1 rep max is the safest way to train heavy. Rep work will actually get you hurt when you go heavy. That's where real injury risk lays. Not from doing heavy singles. They're pretty safe outside of a competitive environment where you're psyched up and screaming and yelling and the music's playing and you might make mistakes from that because you've gone pushed beyond your limits. Talking about training maxes taken to a 1 rep max. They're safe. They're safe even to miss. They're safe to fail on. And then we have obviously metabolic conditioning, which ties into all of it in the sense of metabolic conditioning gets you in shape. Okay? That's obviously needed for anyone who needs conditioning in a sport, but when we start talking about how about your health, how about your recovery, how about your work capacity, people who have built up conditioning can train with more volume. They can train with more volume for the metabolic work, the metabolic fatigue, so they can gain muscle faster. People who are in shape from conditioning can recover quicker between sets of the speed work. They get better work density. People who do metabolic conditioning and who are conditioned recover faster from their workouts. They recover faster from their workouts. So it gives you the ability to essentially train harder, train with a higher work density, and recover from it more effectively. Okay? It is a critical component for maximizing them. Now, could a person still get really big and strong and everything else without the conditioning? Sure. But they are leaving gains on the table. right? They are not training optimal. And that's the difference. And when we talk about combining these elements, no one is saying you can't get amazing results cutting one of these elements out. You cut any four of these elements out. But if you want to train optimally, you need a balance between these four cornerstones. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.